Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. HDM here with a massive update to one of my favorite builds of all time. This is the Hybrid Nightblade solo build Catalyst, updated now for the ESO Deadlands DLC. And this is a good one, you guys. Hybrid builds have more options than ever, almost too many options to count. We'll talk about new and updated gear sets, the best skills, the best passives, basically everything you need to know to build the ultimate Hybrid Nightblade setup in the Elder Scrolls Online. We've got a lot to talk about, so let's jump right into it. All right, everybody, we are back on the Nightblade with something a little bit different. This, of course, is our updated Hybrid Solo Nightblade, the Catalyst build. Got the mixture of Magicka and Stamina abilities all on the Nightblade, so it's a lot of fun to play. Let's go ahead and jump right into our buff stats here. Just with a potion first, and we'll talk about the damage. So look at those raw stat pools. Pretty nice on the hybrid. 28k max Magicka, 28k max Stam. And look at that health, too. 26k max health. A lot of raw stats on this build. Recoveries are decent, about 900 Magicka and Stamina. We also have more health recovery. This is just depending on your food option. We'll talk about some different, ways to get that higher or lower, depending on what you need. Weapon and spell damage unbuffed currently about 4,500. Now, this easily goes over 6k. We have major brutality, major sorcery. We also have our back bar glyph, and depending on your monster set, like I said, easily over 6k. Now, I also want you to check out the critical values because we'll be talking about this a lot. The crit chance on this build is extremely high for a hybrid build. Check this out. 60% spell critical and weapon critical. This can go even higher depending on your monster set. Also, Nightblades have a buff to weapon critical, so that reaches almost about 70%. And this is, like I said, extremely high considering hybrids need both. You need both weapon and spell critical. So we'll talk about a couple ways to get that. Some tricks that I found in this patch, which are pretty interesting. And then as far as resist, don't forget, those go up with your shadow buff as well. And we're wearing, I believe, one piece of heavy armor. So resistances are decent on this build. You can also run some shields, which we'll talk about in a little bit as well. As far as the stats, the attributes, you just want to get these as close to, as similar as possible. You can see I'm at about 28k. And so for that, I had 34 points into Magicka, 30 into Stamina. That'll depend on your glyphs and also what race you choose. Now for the food, I think Bewitched Sugar Skulls is still very good for hybrids. This gives you basically the most stats possible. Tons of health, Magicka, and Stamina. Plus a little bit of extra health recovery is always a good thing. And now you can run other foods that have, like Stamina or Magicka recovery. But I think for just getting the most raw stats possible, Bewitched Sugar Skull is definitely the way to go. Mundus Stone, we've got the Thief. This also buffs multiple. This is going to buff both weapon and spell critical. So again, that's important. Thief is going to be one of the best Mundus options for a hybrid build, in my opinion. And then we talked about the race a little bit. This is very important. Dark Elf is going to be a great way to go because of this passive dynamic. Gives you about 2k max Magicka and max Stamina. So remember, Dark Elves were like the original, the OG hybrid race for ESO, and they still are very good if you want to run a hybrid setup because you get so much stats from this. Of course, you also get the weapon and spell damage here, 258 for both of those. But you also get that from Orc. You also get it from High Elf. So those would be some different ways you could go. Khajiit would be very strong on this build as well. You'd have a little bit less stats, but you'd have more crit damage. And you saw we're over 60% crit chance. So you might be able to up your damage a little bit by running Khajiit on this setup. So that's the basics. As far as potions, I think tri-stat potions are very useful. We have all of our buffs, which we'll talk about in a minute. We have our spell damage, weapon damage, and all our crit chance sources. So you could rotate the basic trash potions depending on what you're low on, or obviously tri-stat is the way to go for the most resources back possible. All right, so what are we running for gear this patch? Well, I have mixed it up a little bit. Now, New Moon Acolyte is still a staple, in my opinion, of hybrid builds. This is a 9-piece crafted set, comes from Southern Elsewhere. You can find this pretty often on Guild Traders, so it's definitely worth picking up, especially if you want to test out some hybrid builds. The reason why it's so good, you get tons of stats, right? You get crit chance, weapon and spell damage, penetration, more weapon and spell damage, at the 5% increased cost of your abilities. Now, you will feel that a little bit on the Nightblade. Nightblade skills in general are a little bit costly. So you will have to be good at managing your resources on this build. I'll give you a couple tricks for that too, but just keep that in mind. If you want to use this, you will need to be fairly good at managing resources, although we are just front barring it, so it's only going to increase the cost of our front bar skills. So the way that we make this work is New Moon Acolyte weapons. So we've got 2 daggers here. We've got Nirnhund as the main hand and then Precise as the offhand. Running double dot poisons currently for a little bit of extra damage. You can also use something like Absorb Stamina, Absorb Magicka to get a bit more resources back if you need better sustain. Now, why daggers? Well, we'll look at the passives in a minute, but daggers give you about 10% total crit chance when you have 2 daggers. That, of course, now applies to both weapon and spell critical, so daggers are just a great way to go in general. This is a melee Nightblade build. We're using melee skills for a lot of our normal abilities, so I just thought this was the way to go. You get tons of crit chance. That counts for 2 bonuses, and then we have the New Moon Acolyte belt using light here. New Moon Acolyte hands, also light. And finally, New Moon Acolyte shoes, also light. We'll talk about the weights in a minute. We do have a mixture of weights, light, medium, and heavy. So first set hasn't really changed. New Moon Acolyte for the win on the Sky Divines, if you can get it. And in terms of the enchants, I'm using Stamina on the small pieces and then Tri-Stat glyphs on the bigger pieces. Now, second set is pretty interesting. I know probably nobody uses this set. I think I found a use for it that I'm actually really happy with this patch, and that is the Tooth Row set from Wayrest Sewers. Yes, this set is often trashed, thrown in the gutter for good reason, I think, because it's given you a very common buff in the past, Major Savagery. That's your, basic weapon critical buff. Now, this set did get hybridized in the Deadlands DLC. So you can see it gives stamina, 2 critical chance bonuses, which is nice. It has an extra, actually, 5-piece bonus here, almost 200 weapon and spell damage. But the main 5-piece bonus got updated as well, I believe, where this now gives you both sources of your major crit buff. So Major Savagery and Major Prophecy at all times. That's increasing your weapon and your spell critical rating. Now, why is that good, right? I thought you could get that from potions or, skills. Well, on the Nightblade, it's actually a little bit harder. Nightblades, in general, as a class, don't have Major Savagery or Major Prophecy. Some classes do have that buff very easily. Dragon Knights have it. Templars have, one of those. So the only other way to get both of these buffs, that would be to run, 2 potions at once, which you can't really do. You can't run weapon power and spell power potions at the same time, or, running Inner Light plus Camouflage Hunter on your front bar at the same time and basically losing 2 bar slots just for these 2 buffs. I didn't want to do that, but I wanted to try to get very high crit chance as well. And so one really nice way to do this, one of my channel members actually came up with this, is to run the Tooth Row set. So if you're wondering about that number 2629, that's about 12% critical chance for each of your main damage types, weapon and spell damage. So you're getting about 24% extra crit chance that you would not have otherwise, or you'd have one or the other. You wouldn't have both on the Hybrid Nightblade. So it's a nice way to really pad out your stats, to really maximize your crit damage from both of your types of skills. So definitely check it out if you have this in the bank, or you might have it in your sticker book if you've run this dungeon enough times. I think there is some usefulness if you're interested in hybrid builds only, right? I wouldn't use this on a non-hybrid setup because you're going to have that buff in some way, probably from a potion or from one of your skills like we talked about. But just to reiterate, it's very hard to get both, and you get them both passively from this set. So definitely check it out if you're interested. This is a medium armor set, so we're going to be running about 2 pieces on the body. So we've got the legs and the chest. Medium armor, like I said, Tri-Stat enchants on the big pieces, divines if you can get it. And then we'll have just 3 pieces on the jewelry. So we got the necklace and 2 rings. Now I am running infused for weapon damage, infused for spell damage, and Bloodthirsty with a cost reduction glyph. And you can kind of play around with these. You could run 2 cost reductions if you feel like you need it, since the hybrid is more challenging to sustain. You could do, a stamina cost reduction and a magicka cost reduction. Totally up to you. You could add more recovery if you want. Play around with it and see whatever feels best to you, but that's what I'm running. Now, finally, for the monster set, you have several options here as well. I think Dami House is really interesting for hybrids this patch. Not even for hybrids, for all builds, actually. It got some interesting buffs. Now, what is nice for hybrids is you get both resources, right? You get stamina and magicka, which is really cool on the hybrid Nightblade. Plus, you get this proc, and the nice thing about the proc is standing within the ring, this sort of molten earth flame ring, you get 300 extra weapon and spell damage. So that's really nice to get that, over 6k weapon and spell damage really easily. Now, I would say this is more of an offensive option. This will be great for if you have a group, or maybe if you're playing with a companion who can either tank or help heal you. If not, if you're playing purely solo, you might want something a little bit more defensive. In that case, I would probably recommend Ice Heart. In place of Dami House, you'll get a little bit less stats overall. You'll get more crit chance, which is good. You'll be up to about 63, 64% crit chance, but you'll get that free damage shield when you crit. So this will be nice for a little bit more defensive options. And then pure healing as well. You could substitute in a mythic, something like Pale Order Ring. If you wanted more on the healing side, that would be a good option as well. Backbar weapon, we've gone with the Inferno Staff. I like the Maelstrom Inferno just to buff those light and heavy attacks. Any Inferno Staff is totally fine, though. Many different ways you can run the hybrid Nightblade. I'll have more options listed in the written guide. Link for that is in the description down below if you want to check it out. But let's talk about skills next. Starting with our front bar. So again, hybrid builds, you're trying to mix and match magicka with stamina, getting all the buffs that you need, as much damage as possible. First skill, Sap Essence, is going to help us do that a lot. This comes from Siphoning. It's our last ability, and what's great about this is it gives us healing back, plus major brutality, plus major sorcery. So that's both of our weapon and spell damage buffs for 20 seconds. So you're going to need to cast this at least once every 20 seconds, to maintain that buff. That's really important. Next will be Relentless Focus. This comes from Assassination. And this is basically our big burst damage. This also increases our weapon and spell damage stacked up. 60 per stack. So I forgot to mention this actually. You'd get, over 300 bonus weapon and spell damage if you keep the stacks, or you can just burn the stacks, get that big damage bow proc plus a nice heal. So sometimes I will save that, especially if I'm just playing entirely solo. It ends up being a nice burst heal on the front bar when you need it. Next up, we've got an interesting skill here. I think this is flexible for things like bosses, world bosses, dungeon bosses. The skill Debilitate is actually really nice. It's a good single target damage over time. It is also a snare, but it also applies minor magicka steal, and that basically is going to increase your magicka sustain. As long as you're doing damage, you're getting bonus magicka back every 1 second because of that debuff. So that's pretty nice. You'll definitely notice a difference with your magicka sustain by running Debilitate. If you're doing something more AoE focused, more grinding focused, you might do some more AoE skills. So something you could do instead would be Dual Wield, since we are running 2 daggers. Something like Steel Tornado for the AoE, or you could even use, Deadly Cloak. Either one of those options would be very strong. Single target DPS skill is going to be Surprise Attack. This is going to be our Stamina Morph. That comes from the Shadow skill line. That's your first ability. Keep in mind the Sundered status effect. That's Minor Breach, so you will get some nice armor debuff from using this. You can also set an enemy off balance just by attacking from the side or behind, so that's a nice way to proc off balance. Remember, heavy attacking an off balance target gives you huge sustain back with your heavy attack, whether you're using daggers for stamina on the front bar or Fire Staff on the back bar for magicka sustain. That is a nice way to get resources back. Next up is going to be Barbed Trap, and this comes from Fighters Guild. This is a nice single target damage over time. Plus, really we want it for the buff here. Minor Force increases your critical damage by 10%. And you saw we have very high crit chance, so this is a must-have buff on the hybrid Nightblade. And then our ultimate here from the Assassination skill line, Incapacitating Strike. A couple reasons why I use this over the Magicka Morph. Magicka Morph is nice for grinding because it gives you ultimate back. But this is more nice for single target because it gives you Sustain through Reeve, which gives you 100 magicka and stamina whenever you do light or heavy attacks. And of course, we also get the bonus damage here. 20% bonus damage for 6 seconds. And since this has a very low cost, we can have a very high uptime on that 20% bonus damage. This is especially important when playing solo or even in a group. At all times, this extra damage is very effective. Let's go ahead and swap to the back bar, which is our Fire Staff. We have some nice AoE dots here. So Razor Caltrops, this comes from the Assault skill line. That's your second to last ability there, and that is really just for major breach. This will be very useful for soloing, especially just to debuff all that armor in an AoE. Let your skills do more damage. That's very important. Then we are combining Twisting Path, another damage over time AoE skill. That comes from the Shadow skill line. Third ability there, and this is also AoE damage over time. Gives you a nice speed boost too, by the way, so if you're trying to get through a dungeon more quickly, you can use this between groups of enemies for that major expedition buff. And of course we have Blockade of Fire, that comes from the Destruction Staff. You will want this primarily for the glyph on the back bar. So with an infused Fire Staff, you're getting, probably between 600 and 700 extra weapon and spell damage fully buffed. Gotta maintain this skill, you guys. That is so much weapon and spell damage. Just from that back bar glyph, you need to maintain that for sure. Then we've got Dark Cloak. This is kind of flexible as well. I want to just a back bar heal since I'm not running a shield currently. Dark Cloak from the Shadow skill line gives you a very strong heal, similar to like Resolving Vigor. You could even run Vigor here if you wanted. But the nice thing about this from the Nightblade class is you get minor protection for 12 seconds, so that's reducing your damage taken. But, like I said, if maybe you're in a group, you could do something like Echoing Vigor for the AoE stamina heal. That'll be a strong option as well. And then Leeching Strikes. This is from Siphoning. This gives us bonus healing whenever we do a light or heavy attack, plus the extra stamina sustain is obviously very nice. Ultimate here to complete the hybrid setup, Fiery Rage from the Destruction Staff. This is basically your go-to in a big AoE pull to clear out a room in a dungeon, something like that. This does tons of damage. Very, very useful. So there you go. That is the basic setup. We can do a quick rotation as well just to show you how it works. All right, as far as buffs go, we got Leeching Strikes, Relentless Focus. Maintain those two. You're good to go. And then you're going to apply your back bar dots. All three of those AoEs. Do your Sap Essence. Debilitate and Barb Trap. Once those are down, you can burn your ultimate and just do your surprise attack. Spam. Use your bow proc when it's ready, and then bar swap back. I'm gonna use a potion here. Block that AoE. Remember, you can heavy attack if you need the sustain, but hopefully you don't need it too much. Go ahead and burn my ult. Bow, surprise attack. Oop, block that. Okay, maintain my buffs. You can see I haven't really needed much healing here, which is good. Block that. Got the off balance so you can heavy attack. Remember, for some big sustain, if you need it, if you're getting low. Should be about it here. Nice bow proc there at the end. There you go. Pretty easy rotation, lots of damage, lots of fun. All right, quickly, passive skills. What do you need? Well, on the Nightblade, most of these are very useful. Master Assassin, you'll want this for flanking. That is great, especially in groups or with a companion. Executioner is amazing for sustain. Paired with some of our CP slotted stars, sustain on this build is very good. Pressure points, of course, more crit chance. That's very good as well. And then Hemorrhage, we didn't talk about this, but you get bonus critical damage on the Nightblade class just by slotting your assassination skills, at least one of those on each bar. So another reason to run the very high crit chance build, even on the hybrid Nightblade. It's strong. Under Shadow, we will want Refreshing Shadows for the extra recoveries. Shadow Barrier, this is what gives us our major resolve buff that will proc off any of your shadow abilities. So surprise attack on the front bar, twisting path on the back bar. Dark Vigor, a little bit of extra health is always good. Dark Veil actually buffs the duration of twisting path, so you will want that one. Siphoning, these are interesting. Catalyst, which this build is named after, gives you plenty of extra ultimate on this build. Remember to try to chug those potions after you burn an ultimate. That's the best way to do it if you can remember. Magicka Flood is great for hybrids. You get more max Magicka having a siphoning ability slotted on each bar. So on the front bar, you can see we've got Sap Essence. On the back bar, we've got Leeching Strikes. That's a lot of extra magicka. That's what we want. Soul Siphoner for the extra healing, Transfer for the extra ultimate. All of these are good. Now, we are running dual wield front bar, so definitely get all of these dual wield passives. Destruction staff passives for the back bar will be useful as well. And we didn't talk about the armor too much. Now, I am using 3 light, 3 medium, 1 heavy. Why do I have these mixed? Well, a lot of the passives here are just good to have in general. For light armor, we get bonus crit rating plus bonus penetration. So for 3 of those pieces, it's pretty decent. It's good. But we also get medium armor passives, right? So we have 6% bonus critical damage and healing. And you saw with such a high crit chance on this build, that's definitely going to be useful. We also have agility here, so 6% extra weapon and spell damage. That's going to help a lot as well. Those would be the main 2 I would get from medium armor. Heavy armor, you don't have to worry about so much. Best ones would probably be Constitution, probably Juggernaut as well. A little bit of extra health is always good. Guild skills, main one would be, Fighter's Guild. We do get extra weapon and spell damage from Slayer, and you get extra ultimate from Banish the Wicked. This changed a couple patches ago. You need to have a Fighter's Guild ability slotted to get this extra ultimate back. So that's why we got Barb Trap on the front bar instead of the back bar. Keep that in mind. We're not running Mage's Guild. We're not running Psijic Order. So not much else here. Of course, Undaunted, if you have this unlocked, Undaunted Metal is going to give you up to 6% bonus max stats. This ends up being really useful on the Hybrid Nightblade. So I definitely would recommend that if you have access to it. Of course, racial skills we talked about, and then alchemy, medicinal use, you want that maxed out as well. Champion points, let's jump into this quickly. In the greed tree, I have the usual slotted stars. Now, if you need to see this at lower CP levels, like 300, 600, 900, 1200, I do have those in the written guide. Make sure to check that out. Link is down below. But the main slotted stars you want for green, at least the ones that I use the most, Steed's Blessing, this gives us a lot of extra movement speed. That's useful. I do like Treasure Hunter for the extra quality items in treasure chests. Rationer to make that food last a little bit longer. And then Liquid Efficiency, just for the chance not to consume a potion. That is nice too. Blue Tree, you have some different options here depending on how you're playing, whether you're playing completely solo or if you have a group or with a companion. For a purely solo setup, I'm going to focus mostly on damage, so Deadly Aim, Mastered Arms, Thaumaturge, and then Fighting Finesse. Now, if you have a group or a companion, you might consider working in Backstabber. That could replace Fighting Finesse, or you could replace something else like Mastered Arms, just to maximize your critical damage a little bit. Other passives you want, Tireless Discipline and Eldritch Insight. I like using both on the hybrid just for extra stats. And then your defensive stars, main one here, Preparation, 10% damage reduction. That's a huge bonus. Make sure you pick that up as well. Red Tree is pretty basic, actually. I do like Rejuvenation, Fortified for the extra armor, and Boundless Vitality for the extra health. Now, 4th star is kind of flexible. One option would be if you're going purely solo and you have like Ice Heart, Bastion would give you a bigger shield. That's usually a very defensive way to go. If you're more focused on like grinding or clearing through dungeons quickly, maybe with a group, you want to focus more on sustain. So Bloody Renewal and even Siphoning Spells, you could actually have both of these and then maybe drop, Fortified or Rejuvenation, one of those, so you can have both Magicka back on kills and Stamina back on kills. That will be very powerful, combined with the Nightblade Sustain passive, which we already talked about. That's the basic setup. Like I said, if you want to see more details, check out the written guide. We'll have multiple setups listed there for you. Last thing we could talk about, I suppose, is the outfit style on this build. It's going to be mostly the Worm Cult style, like the chest and the body pieces, light for that the weight on that. Then we also have a different shoulder that is the Grim Harlequin style for the shoulder pieces, light armor on that one. And then the headpiece is actually a costume. Can show you that as well under hats. That's the Ayleid Royal Crown from Depths of Malatar or Frostvault. All right, everybody. And with that said, that's going to wrap up our ultimate hybrid Nightblade setup, the Catalyst build for the Deadlands DLC update. Hope you all enjoyed this one and you found it informative. Of course, if you did, do us a favor, crush that like button so that YouTube knows to share this video out with as many other viewers as possible. I definitely appreciate that. Remember, if you have any questions at all on the build, if you need to see alternate gear, alternate skills, what the best champion point setup is for you, we have all of that listed in the written guide. There is a link for that down in the pinned comment and the video description. Check that out for more information. But yeah, very excited to be playing hybrids now in the ESO. There's so many good options like we talked about in this video. I want to update all of my hybrid builds, so keep an eye out for those in the near future. I'm talking about Warden, maybe Templar, maybe Necromancer. Who knows? It's going to be a lot of fun. So make sure you're subscribed with those notifications turned on so you don't miss a thing. And as always, thank you all so much for watching. Hope you're doing well. Stay safe out there. And I will see you around in the next video.